Hi everyone. This will be a short video on the issues and debates that you need to know for CIE A-Level Psychology 9990. I will also include a few sample questions and sample answers because some students are not clear on when and where they will use knowledge of these issues and debates. So for A-Levels, there are 10 that you have to know. However, if you took AS level first, followed by A level, you'll already know 5 of them. And they are nature and nurture, individual and situational explanations, application to everyday life, use of children in research, use of animals in research. I made a video on these 5 already, so if you're not sure about these, go back and watch that one first. It's about 10 to 15 minutes if I remember correctly. So before moving on further, I've created a question that follows the design of common Cambridge questions. And I will just type out kind of a bullet point type answer to show you how to approach a question like this. So what it says is Jose and Lily are discussing the study by Yamamoto et al., Chimpanzee Helping. Jose thinks that the results support the individual side of the debate, while Lily thinks that the results support the situational side of the debate. So first, outline the debate for 2 marks. And secondly, explain one reason why Jose is correct and one reason why Lily is correct, using evidence from the study. They could also just ask you to back up one of them, meaning you need 2 points for one side. That can be more difficult, but we'll stick with this question for now. So, outline the individual versus situational debate. This should be fairly easy to get the marks in. Basically, it's going to be 1 mark for individual, 1 mark for situational. So something along the lines of individual explanations argue that a person's behavior is due to characteristics of that individual person. For example, personality or intelligence. Situational explanations argue that a person's behavior is due to features of their environment. For example, a nearby authority figure. And just to make sure the marks, you could say something like, in Milgram's study, the prestigious location and the proximity of the research of the authority figure are situational factors that may affect the obedience of the participants. Something along those lines. Okay. You can pause there and read through it if you wish. Question B. Explain one reason why Jose is correct and one reason why Lily is correct. So think of it as two markers. So, Jose, start with him. Jose is correct. What did he say again? The individual side of the debate in Yamamoto. Jose is correct because individual differences affected the results in Yamamoto et al. Individual differences such as Ayumu's tendency to look through the hole and Pan's tendency to offer the brush. Ayumu looked through the hole in the cannot see condition, allowing her to score very well, as she could visually appreciate her conspecifics problem. This allowed her to offer the tools stick straw more often than the other chimps. If you're struggling to follow what I'm writing, that might be a sign that you need to review the Yamamoto study if you have not done your AS exams yet. So that's Jose is correct. Now, Lily is correct because the chimpanzees usually offered the correct tool, stick or straw, offer the correct tool more often in the can see conditions than in the cannot see conditions. Whether or not they can see the other chimpanzees' problem and need is a situational factor, and it affected how well the chimps performed on the task. Something like that will get you 4 marks. Okay, so on to the A level debates. And just once again, if you want to read that in more detail, just pause the video. So there are 5 more. They are cultural bias, reductionism versus holism, psychometrics, determinism versus free will, and longitudinal research. They're a little bit more complex than the first 5. So we'll go through each one, and then I'll talk about how these relate to actual Cambridge exam questions at A level. So cultural bias is the idea that research might only apply to the culture within which it's conducted in. So research is often collected from narrow samples, not necessarily small samples, but narrow. That means the sample is not diverse. So you could have 10,000 white 20-year-old males from London. That's quite a big sample, but it's very narrow. So it may not apply to 50-year-old women in Kenya. That's an extreme example of cultural bias. It's a problem because it doesn't necessarily apply. So it's not as generalizable. So within each study, you should consider whether this is a factor. So think about Milgram. Can you remember the sample? The sample consisted of 40 males from New Haven. They're all from the same area. They're all male. We don't know for sure, but probably at that time in that area, most, if not all of them, were also white males. The video footage we've seen of Milgram, I've only seen white males. I cannot confirm whether they're all white, but it's quite possible. So it's not just about nationality either. Other cultural factors like race, ethnicity are relevant as well. So the idea is, does data collected on these people necessarily apply to these people? We're talking about diversity. And it goes in reverse as well, of course. A study conducted in Thailand may not be as relevant to people in Mexico. So it's just something we should consider with each study. It might be a weakness of a study. Secondly, reductionism versus holism. Reductionism is the process of explaining complex phenomena, that's hard to say, by reducing them to their component parts. So breaking something down in a simplistic way. It's the opposite of holism. That's the idea that the total is more than the sum of the parts. So if you break things down, you lose something of it. You might miss out on interactions between different elements or something along those lines. So what's good about reductionism is it can make it easier to study something very complex. Like if we're trying to figure out what causes depression, if you reduce it down to biological factors like neurotransmitters, it allows us to study the effects of those neurotransmitters on depression. If we look at the bigger picture, it can be hard. It's a bit messier. It can be very difficult to see what impact something might be having because you're not controlling for everything else. However, it may be too simplistic. You may miss out on important interactions between those neurotransmitters and something else, like the behaviors that people are engaging in, or something along those lines. Um, yeah, and an example of this is biological determinism. Biological determinists claim that um, we don't have free will. Everything is pre-decided, and it's decided by biology. It's an extreme example of determinism, which we'll talk about soon. And this is a nice image from Very Well Mind, which is a great website for psychology. If you break a car down to its component parts, it's easier to study those parts. Maybe you need to fix them, so you just look at them. But by themselves, they don't represent much. And together, they're a functional and useful machine. Psychometrics is the scientific study of psychological assessment. Essentially, self-reports are psychometrics. It literally means measurement of the mind. The emphasis is on questionnaires and tests like IQ tests, personality tests. But neither of which actually are a big part of the A-level syllabus. The psychometrics we'll look at are things like the Beck Depression Inventory, the Kleptomania Symptom Assessment Scale, Blood Injection Phobia Inventory, Generalized Anxiety Disorder Assessment. There's also a couple of measures for OCD. And then in the organization section, we have quite a lot that are relevant to job satisfaction. Sorry, the structure of this is a bit messed up. I'll just fix it. So loads of them on the A-level syllabus. Determinism and free will. Determinism is the view that we have little or no control over our behavior or our destiny or fate. Free will is the idea that we do. So this is a nice image I found online. So in this case, this is a deterministic situation. Looks like you have a choice, but you don't. So this is a debate people have. And sometimes explanations for something might suggest determinism. In abnormality, this can be a weakness because if something's pre-decided, what can we do about it? It doesn't make it, it's not useful as an explanation. We want an explanation to lead to solutions. If it's a deterministic explanation, for example, that schizophrenia is caused by genetics, we can do less with that information in a practical, real-world way. Free will refers to the view that we make choices and that these choices affect our behavior and our lives. And these are just two types of determinism. Extreme determinism. So biological would say that genetics, hormones cause us to behave in certain ways. Environmental determinism claims that our environment causes us to behave the way we do, and only that, if you have extreme determinists. Most people who believe in determinism would meet you in the middle, though. They would accept that some things are determined, others are not. Longitudinal research, it takes place over a long time. So it follows one or more participants throughout the period, or studies them at regular intervals, maybe once every 6 months, to monitor any changes. The opposite is a snapshot study. Most studies are snapshot studies. They might take place over a week or a day. It doesn't show change over time. Only one study at AS level could be considered longitudinal. It's debatable about whether it is or not, because they have follow-ups after 6 and 12 months, but then they stop. And that is Saavedra and Silverman, the boy with button phobia. They're the only studies that can track changes over time. You measure a baseline and then you see how that changes. So, for example, in abnormality, we could put someone through a drug treatment for depression and then measure their symptoms with something like the Beck Depression Inventory every 6 months over a number of years, and we can see if it's working for them. Okay, so that's all 10. And I'll just show kind of how this might be used in an exam. There's two main ways at A level. You might get a explain a strength or weakness of a study type question, like this that I've just written. Explain one weakness of Blau and Bohl's model of absenteeism. So in this model, they explain the types of absenteeism people have at work based on whether they have high or low organizational commitment and job involvement. You could argue that one weakness of this model is that it is reductionist in a few ways. Right, let's explain why it's reductionist first. Firstly, it breaks organizational commitment and job involvement into simply high or low categories. This oversimplifies a complex phenomenon. Yeah. Actually, it's plural. This oversimplifies complex phenomena by grouping everyone into one of two groups. Secondly, it assumes that we can predict absenteeism type based on only these two factors, when many others may apply, e.g., family, size, and personality. That is why it's reductionist. Why is this a weakness? This may be a weakness as interactions between factors like family size and job involvement may be ignored, meaning that the model is less accurate than it claims to be. You want to read that in more detail? You can pause and do so. That would get you 2 marks. We're stating the weakness, it's reductionist. Then we explain why it's reductionist, and then we explain why that is a weakness. You may notice that for 2 marks, there's a lot more here than at AS level. It's a lot harder to pick up 2 marks at A level than AS level. Make sure you're writing enough. Maybe not quite this much is necessary, but certainly more than one sentence is necessary. Right, and where you'll often use these issues and debates then is in these long evaluations. You'll have 3 or 4 paragraphs, each one based on an issue or a debate usually. So I'll just bullet point this one. I'll just explain an approach. So evaluate explanations for depression, including a discussion of determinism. So I would first outline what determinism is. Argue why the explanations are or are not deterministic. Discuss why this is a good or a bad thing. That's where you're essentially evaluating. You want to compare and contrast the explanations on the syllabus. And that would be your paragraph. You'll do that 3 or 4 times to try and get as close to 10 marks as you can. All right, so the 10, just to sum up, the 10 issues and debates are on the screen. Applying psychology to everyday life, individual versus situational explanations, nature versus nurture, using children, using animals. That's AS level. Then A level, cultural bias, reductionism versus holism, psychometrics, determinism versus free will, and longitudinal research. Thanks for watching. See